Classic rock wasn't just built on riffs and rebellion, it thrived on chaos. And nothing brought chaos faster than a forbidden affair. Behind the scenes of iconic bands were secret relationships, steamy betrayals, and love triangles that pushed friendships to the brink. These weren't just flings. They were emotional grenades that exploded studios, tours, and decades-long partnerships. From bandmates sleeping with each other's spouses to romances that sparked full-blown mutiny, these affairs didn't just stir gossip, they wrecked careers. These are the love stories that tore classic rock legends apart, proving that in rock and roll, the heart is the most dangerous instrument. Fleetwood Mac. Fleetwood Mac's greatest album was born from personal collapse. As they recorded Rumors, the band wasn't just unraveling. They were at war with each other, emotionally and romantically. John and Christine McVie's marriage had fallen apart. Yet, they stood just feet away from one another in the studio, pretending everything was fine. "We were professional," Christine later said, "but it was agony." Meanwhile, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks were locked in their own chaos. Their once passionate romance turned toxic, each writing songs aimed at the other. Stevie's Dreams was a plea for emotional release. Lindsey's Go Your Own Way was a brutal response. The tension wasn't hidden. It was the music, and the fans could feel every word. Then came the real twist. Drummer Mick Fleetwood and Stevie Nicks began an affair behind everyone's back. It fractured the last sense of trust in the group. "It was insanity," Nicks recalled. "We were all sleeping with each other, fighting, and then getting up and playing music." That music somehow turned into a masterpiece. Despite, or because of, the wreckage, Rumors became a defining album of the 1970s. Every track was steeped in real pain, real betrayal, and real love that had curdled into resentment. Fleetwood Mac didn't just sing about heartbreak, they lived it, together, in front of the world. Fleetwood Mac didn't hide their mess, they turned it into gold. But not every band handled tension with harmony. Some, like the Beatles, watched their foundation crack quietly until it exploded. What happens when fame, ego, and a new love collide in the recording studio? For the Fab Four, the dream was ending, and everyone saw it happen in slow, painful motion. The Beatles. By 1969, the Beatles were barely holding it together. John Lennon's relationship with Yoko Ono had grown into something all-consuming, and her constant presence in the studio was a sharp break from the group's previous code. No outsiders. Paul McCartney resented it. "It was invasive," he admitted later. "The studio was our safe space, and suddenly, it wasn't." John didn't back down. His loyalty to Yoko only deepened the growing rift between him and Paul. George Harrison, too, felt squeezed out. His songs were often sidelined, despite his growing talent. "I had all this music," he said, "but there was no room for it." Resentment quietly festered until it exploded in rehearsals and behind-the-scenes arguments. Then came the business war. Paul wanted Lee Eastman, his soon-to-be father-in-law, as manager. The others backed Alan Klein, a tough New York businessman. That split wasn't just financial, it was personal. Trust collapsed. Old friendships turned into cold negotiations. And every recording session became a minefield of passive-aggressive jabs and quiet storms. By 1970, the end was official. They weren't the Beatles anymore. They were four men walking away from a dream they'd built together. "It was like a divorce," Ringo said. And no one really wanted it to end, but no one could stop it either. The Beatles went out not with a bang, but with bruised hearts and broken bonds. Some bands disintegrate gradually. Others implode in silence. But a few carry on, touring, recording, even smiling, while burying deep betrayals. That's what happened with the Ramones, punk's founding fathers. Their story wasn't just loud guitars and leather jackets. It was a love triangle so bitter, it froze a friendship forever, even as they stood shoulder to shoulder on stage. The Ramones. They were the loudest, rawest thing in punk. But inside the Ramones, silence said everything. When Johnny Ramone began secretly dating Joey Ramone's girlfriend, the fallout was brutal. Joey was blindsided and heartbroken, but he didn't confront Johnny. Instead, the pain simmered, and the silence between them became permanent. For the rest of the band's career, they barely spoke off stage. The betrayal cut deep. Johnny, the band's cold, disciplined guitarist, saw no need to apologize. Joey, the emotional heart of the band, channeled his heartbreak into lyrics. The KKK Took My Baby. Away wasn't just a song. It was a coded attack on Johnny. Fans didn't know the full story at the time, but the venom was real. Despite the personal rift, the Ramones kept performing. Night after night, they stood side by side pretending the past hadn't shattered them. The music stayed fierce, but the chemistry was gone. What had once been a brotherhood was now a cold transaction, one that ended with Joey dying in 2001 and Johnny refusing to attend his funeral. Years later, Johnny admitted the truth. "We weren't friends anymore," he said, "but we still had a band to run. It was the most Ramones thing ever. Play through the pain, never look back, and let the music scream what the words never could." The Ramones kept the volume high to hide the wounds, but in Aerosmith, it wasn't silence. It was shouting, swinging fists, and backstage chaos. When egos collided and personal relationships went toxic, even hit records couldn't hold them together. Their collapse would be loud, messy, and nearly permanent. Next, the fight that broke America's biggest rock band. Aerosmith. In the late 70s, Aerosmith was on fire, musically and emotionally. Joe Perry, the band's lead guitarist, was locked in constant tension with Steven Tyler. The final straw? Joe's wife, Alyssa. Her presence backstage became a major point of conflict, especially with the other band members. Rumors swirled that she clashed with everyone, feeding the chaos that already surrounded the group. A physical altercation backstage, reportedly involving Alyssa and spilled milk on Tom Hamilton's wife, ignited everything. The fight spiraled in Pontour into a screaming match between bandmates. Joe, already burned out from the drugs and dysfunction, stormed out. "We were so high we couldn't see what we were destroying," Tyler later admitted. By 1979, Perry was gone. Brad Whitford followed shortly after. What was once the Toxic Twins had become a cautionary tale. Without their signature chemistry, Aerosmith's next album flopped. The band drifted, lost in addiction, egos, and fading fame. "We couldn't even look at each other," Whitford recalled. It was that bad. Years later, they reunited and even found a second wave of success. But the scars never fully healed. The betrayal, the fistfights, the near collapse. It all lived in the background of every note they played. Aerosmith survived, but they were never the same band again. They burned out and barely came back. But for Fleetwood Mac, lightning struck twice. After surviving one infamous love triangle, the band was torn apart again, this time from the inside out. What happens when a trusted bandmate sleeps with your wife? For Mick Fleetwood, it wasn't just betrayal. It was heartbreak, humiliation, and yet another reminder that love and loyalty don't always share a stage. Fleetwood Mac. Just a few years after Rumors, Fleetwood Mac found themselves in yet another love-fueled disaster. This time, the betrayal came from within. Guitarist Bob Weston was secretly having an affair with Mick Fleetwood's wife, Jenny Boyd. When Mick found out, it hit him like a second heartbreak, another personal betrayal inside the band he was trying to hold together. The news broke mid-tour. The band was performing in the US when whispers started flying. Tension thickened, rehearsals became unbearable, and soon Mick couldn't ignore it. "I was devastated," he later said, not just as a husband, but as a friend. The betrayal fractured the fragile trust that had only just started to rebuild post-Rumors. Fleetwood had no choice. He fired Weston immediately. But the damage was done. In a rare and painful move, the band canceled the rest of the tour. Fans were stunned. Promoters were furious. The group had gone from one of the biggest acts in the world to a public soap opera. Again, Fleetwood Mac would go on, reshuffle, and survive. But Mick's trust in the people around him was forever changed. "When it comes to this band," he once said, "the music was the easy part. The people, that's where things always broke down." Another chapter in their legacy, written in heartbreak and silence. Fleetwood Mac's drama played out on headlines and stages, but sometimes collapse comes quieter. For Guns N' Roses, it started with a friend who couldn't stay clean. A drummer whose addiction didn't just ruin performances, it fractured friendships. What followed wasn't just a firing. It was a lawsuit, a broken bond, and a band that would never burn quite as bright again. Guns N' Roses. Steven Adler was more than a drummer. He was the heart of Guns N' Roses' early energy. Wild, joyful, and fiercely loyal, Adler brought chaos and charm in equal measure. But as the band rose to global stardom, his heroin addiction spun out of control. Rehearsals were missed, shows were sloppy, and his playing began to suffer. "It broke our hearts," Slash admitted, "but we couldn't save him." The band tried to help. They gave him ultimatums, support, and second chances. But the drugs kept winning. Eventually, in 1990, they fired him. "It felt like losing a brother," Duff McKagan later said. Adler was crushed, but not just by the firing. He believed he'd been manipulated into signing away his royalties and sued the band shortly after. In court, Adler claimed he was misled while under the influence and pressured to sign a contract he didn't understand. He won a settlement, but the emotional cost was far higher. Guns N' Roses had lost something irreplaceable, its reckless beating heart. Adler never fully recovered. He battled addiction for decades, attempted multiple comebacks, and finally found some peace in later years. But the bond with his former bandmates? Shattered. "They were my family," he said once through tears. And then they were gone. The breakup didn't just end a lineup, it changed the soul of a band. The Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones had swagger, success, and sex appeal. But behind the stage lights, jealousy was eating them alive. In the mid-60s, guitarist Brian Jones was dating model and actress Anita Pallenberg. Their relationship was passionate, toxic, and often violent. But the final blow came when Anita left Brian for his bandmate, Keith Richards. The betrayal shook the band's foundation. Brian spiraled. Already struggling with addiction and paranoia, he grew more erratic. He missed rehearsals, clashed with Mick and Keith, and lost creative control. The band tried to help, but his mental health and drug use only worsened. He was lost, Keith later admitted, and we didn't know how to save him. By 1969, the Stones had had enough. They forced Brian out of the band, the group he had founded. Just a month later, he was found dead at the bottom of his swimming pool. The official cause was death by misadventure, but fans never stopped asking questions. Was it suicide, an accident, or something darker? The band moved on, but Brian's ghost never left them. The love triangle, the firing, the mystery, it haunted their legacy. "It broke us," Mick once said, "even if we never said it out loud." The Stones became rock gods, but the cost was one of their own. In the Stones, betrayal came wrapped in love and silence. But for Oasis, it came with flying insults, smashed guitars, and a sibling rivalry played out in front of millions. They weren't just a band. They were a battleground. And in the end, it wasn't addiction or affairs that tore them apart. It was blood, ego, and two brothers who couldn't let go. Oasis. From the start, Oasis was fueled by tension. Liam Gallagher was the wild frontman. Noel was the brooding songwriter. Together, they made magic. But behind the scenes, it was chaos. "We couldn't go a day without a fight," Noel once said, "and sometimes not even an hour." The fights were legendary, verbal, physical, often public. They clashed over lyrics, lifestyle, set lists, and women. Liam would insult Noel on stage. Noel would respond with walkouts or backstage threats. The tabloids feasted, fans were divided, and the music, though still brilliant, began to crack under the pressure. Things came to a head in 2009. Minutes before a show in Paris, the brothers got into a vicious argument. A guitar was smashed. Words were exchanged that couldn't be unsaid. Noel walked away and never came back. Just like that, Oasis was done. "I simply could not go on working with Liam a day longer," Noel said in a public statement. Since then, they've refused to reunite, despite massive offers and fan pressure. The bitterness remains. "He's a man with a fork in a world of soup," Liam once joked about his brother. Funny on the surface, tragic underneath. Because Oasis wasn't just a band, it was a family. And sometimes, those are the hardest to fix. Oasis was shattered by bloodlines, but another group, sweet, sunny, and known for harmony, was destroyed by something even more fragile: trust. The mamas and the papas sang of love, but behind the scenes, betrayal turned their bond toxic. A secret affair ripped them apart from the inside, leaving behind nothing but melodies, heartbreak, and one of the most dramatic band implosions of the 1960s, the Mamas and the Papas. They looked like the perfect quartet, carefree, bohemian, in perfect harmony. But the Mamas and the Papas were built on secrets. In 1966, Michelle Phillips began an affair with bandmate Denny Doherty. The only problem, she was married to John Phillips, the group's leader, songwriter, and musical architect. The betrayal shook the group to its core. John was crushed. The affair wasn't just personal. It was professional sabotage. The band depended on chemistry and with trust, and now both were gone. "I felt like a fool," John later said. "I was writing songs for a wife who was sneaking around with my best friend." Michelle was briefly fired from the band, but public backlash forced them to bring her back. Still, the damage lingered. Recording sessions grew tense. Live shows felt awkward, and even though the harmonies still sparkled, the warmth between members had vanished. By 1968, they were done. The band that had once defined California dreaming ended in emotional exhaustion. We were singing songs about peace and love, Denny reflected. But behind the curtain, we were a mess. The breakup wasn't explosive. It was quiet, slow, and deeply sad. The music lived on, but the people never truly healed. Jefferson Airplane was psychedelic, loud, and unapologetically chaotic. And so were their relationships. At the center of the storm was Grace Slick, the band's fearless frontwoman. She began dating drummer Spencer Dryden, and while the romance burned bright at first, it quickly spiraled into jealousy and instability that bled into their music and performances. As their love unraveled, so did the band's internal balance. Spencer became increasingly insecure, and Grace, never one to be tamed, moved on to other bandmates. The backstage tension turned toxic. We were all sleeping with each other, fighting with each other, and trying to write hits in between, Grace admitted years later. The rampant drug use didn't help. LSD, cocaine, and alcohol were constant companions during recording sessions and tours. Members clashed over creative direction, personal drama, and power struggles. On stage, they looked united. Off stage, they were falling apart. Grace would later recall walking into rehearsals unsure if anyone would even show up, or if they'd still be speaking. By the early 70s, the original Airplane lineup was gone. The band splintered into Jefferson Starship, but the raw magic was lost. "We had something special," Dryden reflected, "but we destroyed it from the inside out." They didn't just crash. They combusted, undone by passion, pride, and far too many chemicals. Jefferson Airplane soared too close to the sun and paid the price. But not every band was brought down by affairs and ego. Sometimes it's addiction that quietly erodes the soul of a group. For the Clash, the fire that made them punk icons was slowly smothered by control, heroin, and a betrayal that would break their revolutionary spirit for good. The Clash. The Clash was a movement, not just a band. But even movements can rot from within. By the early 1980s, drummer Topper Headon was deep in heroin addiction. He was one of the band's most talented members, but the drugs made him unreliable. Missed rehearsals turned into missed shows. Eventually, Joe Strummer and the rest had no choice. They fired him. That firing started a domino effect. Creative tensions between Joe Strummer and Mick Jones exploded. Strummer wanted discipline and purpose. Mick leaned toward experimentation and freedom. They started clashing over everything: lyrics, tempo, political direction. "We were pulling in different directions," Joe said, "and nobody was willing to bend." In 1983, Strummer and bassist Paul Simonon fired Mick Jones. The man who co-wrote some of their biggest hits was gone. Fans were stunned. Without Mick and Topper, the chemistry collapsed. Their final album, Cut the Crap, was a critical failure, plagued by poor production and infighting. It felt like a band pretending to still be whole. By 1986, the Clash was over. No farewell tour, no closure. Just silence. A group that once defined punk rebellion had quietly imploded. "It didn't end with a bang," Simonon said. "It ended with heartbreak." The band had fought against the system until they turned that fight on each other. While the Clash lost their fire through fighting, another group was crushed by fate. Led Zeppelin had it all: talent, swagger, and power. But tragedy doesn't care about fame. One by one, the pillars of the band broke beneath personal loss and addiction. And in the end, It wasn't ego or betrayal that ended them. It was something far more human. Grief. Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin were untouchable in the 1970s, rock gods in leather and lightning. But behind the swagger and sold-out stadiums was a band walking a razor's edge. Robert Plant's life shattered in 1977 when his 5-year-old son, Karak, died suddenly from a stomach virus. "I thought about quitting music completely," Plant said. "Nothing made sense anymore." As Plant grieved, the rest of the band tried to carry on, but the weight was unbearable. John Bonham, already known for heavy drinking, spiraled deeper into addiction. Touring became tense. Shows felt hollow. The wild backstage parties that once defined them turned into something darker, more desperate than celebratory. Then came the final blow. In 1980, after a long day of drinking, John Bonham died in his sleep. He had consumed 40 shots of vodka. The band was gutted. "We lost a brother," Jimmy Page said. "And without him, we couldn't go on." True to their word, Led Zeppelin disbanded immediately. They could have replaced him, kept the brand alive, but they didn't. Out of respect, they ended it. No drama, no ego, just silence. Their legacy was sealed, but their story ended in heartbreak. "The music lives forever," Plant later said, "but the pain doesn't go away." Zeppelin chose silence over substitution, but not every group had that kind of grace. In Creedence Clearwater Revival, it wasn't tragedy or addiction that tore them apart. It was family. When blood turns bitter and egos go unchecked, even the tightest harmonies can fracture. For CCR, their final note wasn't a hit. It was a heartbreak that never healed. Creedence Clearwater Revival. At their peak, Creedence Clearwater Revival was unstoppable. But behind the swamp rock hits and tight grooves was a growing resentment between frontman John Fogerty and his brother, rhythm guitarist Tom Fogerty. Tom felt sidelined, overruled, and creatively stifled. John, driven and controlling, saw no need to compromise. "I had a vision," John said, "and no one else could see it." By 1971, the tension had boiled over. Tom quit the band, walking away from both the music and his brother. The remaining members tried a democratic approach to songwriting, but it failed. Without John's leadership, CCR lost its spark. Their final album, Mardi Gras, was panned. Critics called it the worst album by a major band. John refused to perform CCR songs for years. Even when Tom passed away in 1990, the wounds remained. At the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 1993, John performed without the other surviving members. "Too much pain," he said. "Too much history." A band that sounded like brothers became a story of silence and regret. CCR's legacy is undeniable, but so is the sadness that surrounds it. Their fall wasn't loud or scandalous. It was slow, bitter, and deeply personal. And like many band breakups, it wasn't really about music. It was about control, pride, and the damage that sometimes only family can do. The music may last forever, but the bonds between bandmates often didn't survive these betrayals. What began as passion turned into poison, wrecking albums, ruining friendships, and leaving lasting scars. For every chart-topping hit, there was often a broken vow behind it. Affairs didn't just cause tension. They changed the course of rock history. Some bands patched things up, others disbanded for good, but all of them paid a price. In the world of classic rock, the real drama wasn't always on stage. It was in the tangled mess of backstage romance. Because when love gets loud, even legends can fall apart.